This is the Whimsy Farm Podcast. I'm Carolyn Crane.
There's a big wide world right out your door. Good people doing good things. Whoa, it's a big wide world. Now is the time. Now is our time.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 20 of the podcast. Today I speak with author Carol Menaker and discuss her memoir, The Worst Thing We've Ever Done, One Juror's Reckoning with Racial Injustice. Her book explores the trial and unjust incarceration of Freddy Muhammed Burton, imprisoned for 50 years now in Pennsylvania for crimes he did not commit. Welcome to the Whimsy Farm Podcast, Carol Menaker.
Thank you. Great to see you again, Carolyn.
Nice to see you again, too. So, you had an experience decades ago now that has made such an impact on your life that you wrote a book about it. And that's what we're here to talk about today, is that experience, the man that you encountered during that experience, and what you've done in the meantime. It's quite a story. Can you take us back to when it began in Philadelphia in the early 70s and tell us how your life intersected with the life of Frederick Burton?
Sure. In 1976, I lived in Philadelphia with my fairly new husband in a little townhouse. They called them Father, Son, Holy Ghost houses because there were three floors in the houses, in an old Irish neighborhood. I love that place. I still dream about it. And I was 24 years old and just like, full of all the hope of a young woman who's 24 years old. Right out of college, just got married, had a good job, or a job that I liked that looked like it had a future. And lo and behold, one day I got a jury summons, and I didn't think a whole lot about it. I'd only lived in Philadelphia for a couple of years. And so I scheduled my day to go there. I figured I'd go in, I'd go out, I'd go home. That is not what happened. And instead, what happened was I was part of a voir dire, which is the questioning by the two opposing attorneys of potential jurors to see if they can choose. Each one of them wants to choose the ones that are going to go their way, but they have a technique for doing this. It's well studied. And I was selected for a jury in a murder trial of Frederick Burton, who was charged with the murder of two wardens inside the Holmesburg prison in Philadelphia. And I really didn't know what hit me because not only was I selected, but at the moment I was selected, I was walked essentially to the hotel where I would be in for 3 weeks, in no communication with anyone I knew or loved, not reading any newspapers, not doing anything. And at that age, it was such a sharp contrast with that hopeful young woman who had everything that it was really, really tough for me. But I did the best that I could at that time, and it took 2 weeks to select a jury. It was a very, very controversial trial because these two wardens were murdered inside the prison by two men who had already been convicted of murder. So there was a lot already sort of frozen there in terms of what had really happened. But I didn't know why Frederick Burton was in jail in the first place. And I assumed that if he was in jail, he did something really bad. And if this is something they said he did, he probably did it. And that's what I knew about him going into the trial. So having said that out loud right now, it sounds like I'd already made up my mind, but I don't think I had. I think I just didn't know how to interact with what was going on around me at the time. And so I just, made the best choices that I could.
Well, it sounds like, as you were explaining it to me, that you basically had faith in the system, that if he was there, there had to be a reason, and you were going to be open to the facts, but the system held value to you.
Yes, the system held a lot of value to me. I never thought about putting it into those words, but that's exactly what I thought. I thought if I'm being presented with this situation in this way, then this is the context. This is the narrative tale that they're leading me down, and let's just see what I can see.
Now, one of your fellow jurors had prior knowledge that influenced her. She mentioned that to you, but she never shared it with you until after the trial, and that involved his first conviction. So already this gets to be quite a labyrinth of what happened to him. So there's the second murder, you were on that jury, you found him guilty, but there was a previous trial that you didn't find out about until after your trial, or the
Hmm.
trial you were a juror on. Can you tell us a little bit about that 1-2 thing that changed Freddie Burton's life forever?
Yeah, it is as best as my memory is, there was a woman who alluded to me that she knew what Frederick Burton had done. If it's okay, I'll refer to him to as Muhammad because that's what he's known as now. And she just said something to the effect of, "He's never going home," to me. And I didn't know what he did, but it turns out that the reason that he was in prison in first place is that he was convicted of murdering a Philadelphia police officer. And once I learned that in my mind, after the trial was over, which is when I learned it, I thought, well, I probably did the right thing to convict him because if he killed a police officer, then it's not impossible that he also killed these two wardens. And so that all took place in Philadelphia at a time where there was a lot of animus between the Philadelphia Police Department and the African American community in Philadelphia. Um, it's not unlike some of the things we witness today with people of other cultures and interests, and that Frank Rizzo, who was mayor, was essentially, in my opinion, hell bent on reining in anything that would give the African Americans in Philadelphia the life that they deserved, as every other Philadelphian had. And when Mohammed was arrested for this murder, the city was in a bit of turmoil because there was going to be a Black Panther convention in Philadelphia near that time. And it was tremendous controversy because for those of us white people who lived through the time when the Black Panthers were active, and they still exist, by the way, um, I remember as a kid just being they struck me as militant, and they had guns and they had uniforms, and I was, afraid of them. And my guess is that many people in Philadelphia, white people, were also afraid of them. And this crime that was committed was in and about that time. So there was already a milieu of a lot of tension in the city, and not just because of, you know, sort of abuse by police of African Americans in their communities, which we hear about even now. But just generally, that was the case. And looking back at it, this was something I didn't really piece together because the only thing I knew about the Black Panthers, again, was what the system was presenting to me, what the media was presenting to me. They're scary. They have guns. Somebody's going to get hurt. This is the way it was presented, or a way I took it in as a white person. So all of this was behind um, the rounding up, essentially, of 5 Black men when this police officer was murdered. And when this happened, the police, I don't know how they narrowed it down to those 5 men, but they did. And they rounded them up, essentially. And Muhammad actually turned himself in because he knew they were looking for him and he knew he didn't do anything. So he figured, I'm going to go in, I'm going to straighten this out, and I'm going to go home because I didn't do anything. I didn't kill anybody. I didn't know someone was going to kill anybody. So it's fine. But sadly, that isn't what happened. And the reality of what happened was he never walked out of that Philadelphia precinct office as a free man. And he's not walked out as a free man anywhere for 55 years.
Incredible. Now, you mentioned that he goes by Mohammed now, and I think that's an important part of the story is his conversion to Islam, his dedication to Islam, and that ironically had an impact on his presence and his involvement with the second murders from the jury you served on. Am I correct there?
Yes, yes. I don't know what faith or culture he abided by before all of this happened, but I do know at some point in the prison he changed his name from Frederick to Muhammad, and he took on the faith of Islam. And in the prison, there were multiple factions of different faiths and cultures and gangs or whatever. Each cell block had its own sort of culture. And there, at that time, these different groups were allowed to practice their faith in a community room. And when the day that the murders took place, or even shortly before that, Mohammed and others from his group had asked the warden for more time in the community room, and they pretty much got, we'll see, we'll see, we'll see, we'll see. And the day of the crime, Mohammed and another inmate named Joseph Bowen were admitted to the warden's office to ask for more time in the prayer room. And this is where the narrative splits in half. Because as a juror, you will always be faced with two essentially opposing narratives of what happened in the crime. And it becomes your choice based on your own belief system, which one is true, which parts of one are true, which aren't. And so narrative one was the two men went in, they asked the warden for more time in the community room. And the warden, I was told by Muhammad's attorney that this is what Muhammad told him the warden said. So it's kind of 3 layers of hearsay. But what I was told the warden said was, I'm not going to let you niggers run my prison. And as one story goes, Joseph Bowen went ballistic. He pulled out a knife. He started stabbing the warden. The story is that Muhammad also had a knife and started stabbing. A second warden came in when he heard the ruckus, and Muhammad also had a knife and he stabbed the warden. And that was narrative one. That was the narrative of the prosecuting attorney. The narrative of his defense attorney, who was a very well-known African-American attorney and activist in Philadelphia. His narrative was that the two men went in, they asked for time in the community room, and the warden said to them the same thing, I'm not going to let you niggers run my prison. And the warden pulled his desk drawer out, which was full of confiscated knives from other inmates. And he pulled one knife out and he said to the two men, if you don't stop bothering me about this, I'm going to plant one of these knives in your cell and it's going to be found and you're going to be in the hole for longer than you can imagine, which also enraged Joseph Bowen. At which time the knives that were there, Joseph Bowen took. He testified in court that he was the only one who took a knife, that he stabbed both wardens, and that Muhammad just stood there frozen, telling him to cool it. And so you can tell if I recited those narratives effectively that they were two completely different stories, neither one of which honestly were believable, because how could two men get into the warden's office with knives? And would the warden actually have a drawer full of knives in his office and have no worry about that? So there was something about all of that, which later, much, much later, after the book came out, and I've spoken with lawyers who were asking me questions, and they said, well, wasn't there reasonable doubt in your mind about what happened? And I thought there was exactly reasonable doubt. And I think there would have been reasonable doubt in anyone's mind.
But this is where the judge's instructions come in, because you felt that reasonable doubt, but he gave you and the 11 others a very specific directive that you felt like chained your hands behind your back, so to speak. Is that an
Yeah,
accurate?
it is. And if you've ever been on a jury, you know part of the event, it is sort of an event. Part of the event is that you hear from the prosecution and the defense a certain amount of testimony, but the judge also tells you what the law is that you're being asked to judge against. And at that time, what I heard the judge say was that if Muhammad was in the room, then he was guilty of that crime of murdering the two wardens, even if he didn't actually kill one of them. And it made no sense to me. I was like, he didn't do anything. So why is it so black and white? I mean, isn't there a different sentence for this person, like conspiracy or something like that? But that is the law. It's called the felony murder rule. It's a law in many states in the United States. And essentially, it says if you are in any way part of a violent crime, if you're driving the getaway car and your friend goes into the 7-Eleven and somebody gets killed, you have the same liability for that crime as your friend who pulled the trigger or stabbed him or whatever he did. And I mean, now that law is being challenged, but that law is in effect all over this country, in states all over this country. It's still, and it carries a minimum sentence. It carries a sentence with it. So no matter what happened, you're guilty and you get life in prison without parole. In Pennsylvania, it carries that sentence. So, but at the time I heard the judge say that and I thought, well, I don't really know what happened there, but if that's the law, hey, this is a slam dunk because he was there. Nobody said he wasn't there. He did not testify, by the way. And apparently that's common.
That's an interesting choice that is his the character of his defense attorney as you present him is such a colorful character, and you can see why he would have notoriety and a certain amount of fame. It's interesting that as an activist, he chose not to have Freddy Muhammed take the stand. Do you think that would have made a difference if you all had heard from Mohammed?
And looking back, I think it would have made a difference to me, but I've asked lawyers why that didn't happen. And apparently the odds are, if in a case like this, he were to testify, it would give the prosecution an opportunity to flip everything he said upside down and reinforce the prosecution's case. Apparently that happens a lot. So it's not that uncommon that someone who is being tried for any crime doesn't testify. And I also think, I mean, Cecil Moore, who was his attorney, was very highly regarded. And Mohammed is sitting there in the chair, probably telling himself, I didn't do anything. This is going to all work out okay because I didn't kill anybody. And so he just followed the directions of his lawyer, which was to not testify. And I don't even know how many questions he asked because obviously I didn't know and I didn't know him then. But yes, that's what the judge said. And I was like, okay, easy. That was easy.
It did make it very cut and dried, as you say. So, okay, so we have young Frederick Burton mistakenly identified as a suspect in killing a police officer at a time of extreme racial tension in Philadelphia. He goes in on his own accord, thinks everything's going to be fine, but he ends up convicted, ends up turning to Islam, ends up in the Holmesburg, an infamous prison, with this other Joey, goes into the warden's office to talk about community rooms, stands there, watches some sort of mayhem ensue. The wardens are dead. Again, he's convicted. You finally get to go home because you've been in this hotel that you describe so well. It makes me nauseous just to think hotel. And that was the end of the story for you at that time, right? That was the end. You were in your early 20s. You went on to have a life and have children and a career and everything that you thought you would have. And then something happened.
Yeah, I live in Nevada City, California now, and all of that happened on the East Coast. I was born and raised in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And from the time I moved to California, I started getting jury summons. And I don't know how many times I actually went in or called in and they said, we don't need you. But I got several here for some reason. I feel like I won the lottery or something, these notices. And I got one and I just thought, I'm not doing that. The thought of, even going in there and sitting there because I had lost. I mean, it just was a mystery to me. And I didn't want to participate in that again. And I started to think about why I didn't want to participate in it. And somewhere along the line, I got this sort of bee in my bonnet that I wanted to know what actually happened, since there still in my mind was reasonable doubt. I hadn't heard anything about Mohammed until that time. I didn't know if he was still alive. I didn't know if he was in prison. I didn't know anything at all about it. But something inside me said, why don't you just see what you can find out? So I started to gather information about the trial that I served as a jury on. At the time, I was not allowed to read the newspaper. I didn't know anything about the previous crime, except that it was alleged that he killed a police officer. And so I started to gather information. And this was like this big research project for me. And every time I found something, I was like, whoa, it just kept opening my eyes wider and wider. I didn't know about the Black Panther Conference. I didn't know about the racial tension in Philadelphia. I didn't know that Mohammed had a job and 2 children and twins on the way. I didn't know a lot of things that I thought would have colored my feelings about what happened there. And as many writers do, I have a master's in journalism, so I love to write. I wrote as a career in public relations, but that was a little bit different than a journalist. And I just couldn't stop digging into this information. And then I started reading about the judge, and I started reading about the prosecuting attorney, and I started reading about the defense attorney, and I just dug up everything I could on this subject. And after I looked at everything, I thought, I kind of just totally lost faith in the system because I realized that at that point, I thought he was a pawn. He was sort of like, sadly, the immigrants that are being rounded up now. He was of a certain class and a certain culture, and it didn't matter. They just did this sweep and they picked up these 5 men, and that was the end of it. Conversation over. And so I really felt deeply that there had been, a miscarriage of justice, such as it is. And knowing that I was part of it was really disturbing because I only wished that I'd known then what I learned later in my life. And I'm talking about 40 years after this happened. So one of the ways that this became so engaging was that as I was searching the internet for Frederick Burton, I came across a web page that said Free Frederick Burton. And I thought, well, he must still be alive. He must still be in prison. I didn't know. It was posted by a man who'd been his attorney. And basically, it was asking to free him from the first crime. It said nothing about the prison murders. And I was really perplexed by this because I thought, well, even if he got out for the first crime, what do they do about the second one? It didn't make sense to me. But some months after that, I just sort of blew that off. And I thought, that's another weird piece of information. But some months later, I actually called this attorney. And I said to him, he lives in Santa Cruz, which is about 3 hours away from where I live in California. And again, all of this happened on the East Coast. So I called him and I said, I saw your webpage and I was on the jury for the second murder trial and I have questions. And he said, it's so serendipitous that you called me today because we just received the evidence that we've been waiting for in a long time in the first case that will allow us to take this back to court. And the fact that he learned from our conversation that I was willing to say that I'd made a mistake in the second conviction, he thought that would help their case. And so here I was, right in the thick of it again. And of course, I learned that Mohammed had been in prison for at that time about 50 years, now 55. He's going to be 80 in December. And yeah.
And this attorney's name, Jonathan
Gettleman.
Jonathan Gettleman.
And as a journalist, I have to say the story has so many legs that sometimes it makes my head spin. But Jonathan Gettleman is the son of 2 attorneys who represented Mohammed in the 70s. And when they retired out of the legal world, he was in law school. He came out of law school and took on Mohammed's case after them. So his entire family has been engaged in this for at least 2 generations, and I know that his children have all known Mohammed. He's known Mohammed. That part of the story has been extraordinary.
So you said a moment earlier, you told him you realized you'd made a mistake and that he had been working on this all this time. But if the judge's direction to you was about that law, you didn't make a mistake. Muhammad was there. What made you realize? What changed to make you think you'd made a mistake despite that? And then can you talk a little bit about what was Jonathan's rationale for digging into that first case?
Um, I told Jonathan why I voted the way that I did. I told him because the judge's instructions were very clear to me. And what he said to me was, well, the judge made a mistake. And that really floored me because I thought either he told us something about the law that wasn't true, or I didn't hear the right thing. I heard what I wanted to hear because it made the whole process easier. So I don't know exactly what he said, and all of the court records from the trial that I served as a juror on are missing. They don't exist anymore. So nobody can really look back and see what the judge said. But he and others said to me after the fact of all of this that what he said was wrong. And if what he said was wrong, then I really made a mistake because that was what I based my decision on. Now, why the prison murders were not part of his concern was that if he was freed or found not guilty, his first conviction was turned over, he would have already served the maximum sentence that he would have gotten for the prison murders. So he would have served all the time that he would have served, and he should be free. So that's why they felt like, and I now, I very clearly understand that tying the two cases together would make it much harder for him to get justice on the first case. Because if the whole idea that someone was convicted of killing 2 wardens was just like massive. There's a prison in Philadelphia named after these wardens. There's a park in Philadelphia named after the police officer that he allegedly killed. So Jonathan was trying to isolate the first case and say that he was falsely convicted in the first case, and that being the case, he served the maximum amount of time for the second case, and he should be able to go home. He didn't even want to debate whether he did the second case or not. I mean, whether he committed the crime. He wanted to stay focused on the first crime.
And so what happened as that strategy played out for him?
Well, they actually got a hearing with the judge, which they'd been trying to get for probably, I don't know, 15 or 20 years. And the central premise of that hearing was that immunity was granted to one witness for her testimony, which she later recanted, and the presence of an immunity document was not shared with Mohammed or his lawyer. So if they had known that, they would have pursued a different defense, but they did not know that. The biggest challenge was finding the documents. And they did find a correspondence from this witness who said that she was forced to testify. She told the story about the circumstances of her forced testimony. So they had evidence that something was not right. And there is a law, I don't know if it's called the Brady Rule. And it has to do with law enforcement, detectives, maybe even politicians, withholding information from a defense so that they have the upper hand. And that's illegal. You're not supposed to do that. And proving that someone did it on purpose or whether they did it by accident, it's all very complicated. But if that happens, you can challenge the outcome, which is they basically were arguing the Brady Rule, that he didn't know this. If he had known it, his lawyer would have done something different.
That seems like clear indication for a mistrial.
It would have been if all the other circumstances weren't what they were. And also, in many states, they have something called a time bar, which means you have a limited amount of time to bring new evidence to the courts about your case. And in Pennsylvania, it's a very short time. I think it's something like 6 months. It's very short, and I probably shouldn't say that because it might be a little longer than that, but it's a very short period of time. And um, the acquisition of the actual immunity document was not available to him in that short period of time. So when he came to trial, and there was a trial, which I witnessed on Zoom, all this testimony came out. They discussed with experts about what might have happened, what could have happened, why there weren't any records. There was a lot of discussion about, well, this is an old case, so we can't really piece any of this together. This was 50 years after it happened. And essentially, after I think it was 6 days of listening to this, the judge went away, and a long period of time afterwards, it might have been a year or 18 months later, her ruling came down. And essentially, she said his evidence was time barred. There is no merit to his case. So she did not evaluate any of the evidence that was presented to her. She returned to the law, which said he needed to have done this sooner. And that was really heartbreaking because there was so much hope that this was it, okay, finally he's going to get justice.
So, what happened after that? Did Jonathan give up, or did Mohammed give up? What's the next chapter after that? I think it was in 2020 when the Zoom
Yeah,
retrial
and so
happened.
the ruling came out in probably 2021, late 2021. I can't speak for Jonathan, but I know that his heart had been in trying to save Mohammed for decades. And I think that he had tried everything conceivable that the legal system would permit to get justice for Mohammed. And I think that this was difficult for him. It was difficult for me, and I was a relatively new member of this group of people. But he really thought he had it. And quite honestly, in my opinion, he was treated he himself was treated very cruelly in that trial. The prosecuting attorney was really cruel, and in my opinion, and
What did that look like? How could one attorney
well,
be being
she was
cruel to the other?
constantly interrupting him. She was constantly interrupting him. She was shouting, her voice was really loud. And I just had this sense, and this was her job, of course, that she was not going to let this get away from her. That this was maybe her way. This is my opinion because I never met this person, but I had a sense that this was her way of establishing herself as, a good prosecutor, and that she and the Philadelphia DA's office were not going to let this move forward in a way that would be advantageous to Mohammed. And she was the one who was sent out to do this. And the judge told her several times to sort of in some ways, back off, or let's get the contention out of this. So it wasn't just me that was feeling this contention. It was really difficult to watch and to listen to. And so I just, all of this is the same way that all of us gather information and make choices. And I was on a path to see him free. And Jonathan was on a path to see him free. And Jonathan's parents were on a path to see him free. And this whole universe of his old friends, many of whom are still, with him in spirit, if not present, we were just ready to see him free. And it didn't happen.
Is there another legal card to play? Is there something that can still
Well, God
happen?
bless Muhammad. He will always find another legal card to play. So the next chapter of the story is that I have been deeply fortunate to become his friend. And he and I and Jonathan's mother, who represented him for many years and has known him for many, many years, Zoom with one another every couple weeks. And so he's in the Zoom room at the prison, and we are in our respective homes in California, and we talk about many things. But many times that he comes to our visits, He has been in the law library at the prison, and he will come to us with something that he discovered that is relevant to his case and that he wants someone to move forward. And he did find most recently a case, I think it was 2017, of a person who was held without, there was no evidence to bring him in, and there was no charges brought, some situation that was just like his. And he was so excited about it. He was like, look, this is it. He'll hold up the piece of the document in the camera so we can see it. And so he has not miraculously given up any hope about whether he's going to go home or not. He knows he shouldn't be there, and he is spending a lot of time trying to find something that will hold weight in the judicial system that will be relevant to him. And so how's he doing? Well, all things considered, he's doing amazing. And if you ask him how he is, he always says, I'm wonderful. He might joke about bad things in there, but he always says to us, I'm wonderful.
How is he not bitter?
I don't know the answer to that question. I think it's part of who he is. Um, and maybe I don't know. I think of myself in that situation. I think of him in that situation. He has a strength in his heart that, and in his mind, that this too shall pass. And it's just part of his personality. And I don't know how much of it comes from his faith. We have never talked about that. But just observing him and hearing the tales sometimes of what's happening there with his health, his medical care, his failed medical care, all these different things that happen there. In the 55 years he's been in prison, I think at least many of them, and I want to say more than a decade of them, have been in solitary confinement, which he has survived for different reasons that we would think are petty, but we have, the culture, prison culture, is probably even worse than what you see in the movies. That's all I can say. It's the day you're in there, it's punitive. There's not much in there that's kind. And most of it is just regime and punishment. And since COVID, when they discovered that they could operate with fewer guards because they left that, but basically they isolated everyone during COVID. So they didn't have to deal with conflicts among people. People didn't eat in the dining room together. There was no opportunity to socialize, which is part of one way you might survive in that setting. And a lot of those restrictions remain because it just turned out they figured out they could do it and it was easier. They needed less enforcement. And so, this is my view through Mohammed's eyes. And I have no doubt that what he says about what happens there happens.
I just still his attitude is so I don't even know the word for it. I don't want to say heartening. I don't want to say inspiring, but I'm in awe of the fact that he could still have hope and be going to the law library, and it's just incredible.
Yeah, if something happens to me that gets me upset, I don't even want to tell him because I'm thinking that's ridiculous. I mean, what happened to me is like, I don't know, like nothing compared to his existence. And I was talking to him the other day about something that happened and it was very sad. And I thought to myself, and he was very sympathetic. And I thought to myself, I said to him, I don't even know why I'm telling you this because it has no merit next to what you have managed to rise above. And I'm grateful to you for showing me that rising above the most difficult circumstance can be done by some people. And he's very learned. I don't know where he gets all of his information, but any subject that we bring up in our call, he's got the history of something or this culture. Oh yeah, I saw this. That. So he teaches me things that I didn't even know about. And so he's found a way to access information. I know he doesn't have access to the internet. He can't email, but he can call, all of which he has to pay for his phone calls. He has to pay for the Zoom calls. Well, they take money out of his commissary account. They take money out of his commissary account as a copay for medical, which is like, to me, really mind-boggling. Not funny, it's just like so crazy. But I visit with him. I put some money in his commissary account every month. If that makes his life easier, then that's what I do. And the writing of my book turns out to, for me, come to terms with who I was, with how people can have racial bias without knowing it, with how the criminal justice system has significant flaws and failures in it that when you participate in it, if you end up participating in it as a victim, as someone who's charged with a crime, as a jury member, you need to really understand the context of what you're dealing with because it's all about the law. And people who are lawyers and people who are judges follow the law. That's what they're tasked to do. And that's where, in my case, things sort of went awry. But it's a tough job and to be a juror. And I think that people who do it after reading my book maybe would take it very, very seriously. And I don't think the system is any better than it was. I just think there are a lot of circumstances of every crime that we need to ask ourselves about. And there are many crimes that people deserve to be convicted of. I don't think everybody should just go home. But there are also, I have no doubt, there are many people like Mohammed who are in prison who took a plea deal, weren't there, were victims of the felony murder rule, who would like to go home and whose family members would love to have them home.
I'm struck by the title of your book. That's quite a statement. The worst thing we've ever done. Why do you think it is the worst thing we've ever done?
Well, that phrase comes from Brian Stevenson, who is the head of the Equal Justice Initiative. And there's a second phrase to that phrase, which is each of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done. And that always struck me in Mohammed's case, because even if he did do these things, which I don't believe that he did, he is more than that. And there are many people in prison now who did do evil things, who are much more than they were when those crimes were committed. And I have a lot of respect for Brian Stevenson and what he's done in Montgomery, Alabama. And that statement of his really sat with me. And so for me, if the worst thing Mohammed ever did was commit one or these other crimes, he's still more than that. And if I convicted him falsely, then that might be the worst thing I ever did. But I'm more than that. And I think that thinking that about people is so critical, because so many of us judge someone based on one thing that they do, and don't stop to think about maybe there was a really good reason they did it, or they're just not evil because of this one circumstance. And of course, these are very big circumstances, but just in day-to-day life. So judging people because of what they look like, because of the clothes they have on, all of these things that many of us have been raised to do, really needs to be examined, I guess is the best word I can use.
Thank you. If someone wanted to start following Mohammed's case or contact him with any support, how would they go about doing that?
If someone wants to contact him, they can contact me, and I feel fine if you want to share my contact information with people. They can contact me through my website or just directly with my email, and I have his mailing address. He can only receive mail, and all of his mail is scanned and determined whether it's something he should get or not get. And when I did some of my book readings, I gave people postcards that were addressed to him, and many of the people sent him postcards, and he was delighted to hear from people who had read the book, who knew me, and it brought joy to him to know that there were people out there who would do that. So if someone wants to correspond with him, they can. Right now, the only way that I can think of to help move his case forward is to perhaps make a contribution to one of the many nonprofit organizations that are working on unequal justice. Right now, the Abolitionist Law Center in Philadelphia is working on Mohammed's case to have him moved from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia, another prison in Philadelphia, which is 20 minutes from his family rather than 4.5 hours from his family. His family's not really in a position to take a lot of time off of work and go to Pittsburgh and spend a whole day. It's really 2 days to make the trip. I've made it a couple times, and it's a journey. So if he was 20 minutes from his family, they could see him more often and in person instead of on Zoom, which would be good. And the prison that he wants to transfer to has many more elderly inmates, and the attention to that aspect of them is better than it is where he is. So the Abolitionist Law Center in Philadelphia there's an attorney assigned to him there. And right now her effort is to get his medical needs taken care of and get him moved, which has been going on now for 2 years. So nothing happens fast. And it's not on the Abolitionist Law Center, it's on the system. And I feel like in my heart that we're getting much closer to that. And to me, the last time I visited with him on Zoom, he was in a different Zoom room at the prison, and I thought he had moved. I was so excited, and I was saying out loud to myself, "Oh my God, it's a different room. He's not in that room anymore," and I'm waiting, and I see him come in. I said, "Where are you, Mohammed?" He said, they moved him to a different block for some reason. I don't know why, but they did. And so the Zoom room on that block has a different mural on the back wall and different size um, uh, cement blocks that are in the room. And I just had this moment of, oh my God, not to me, that's free just to get him out of the place he's in. So that's number one. And he's still there, but I'm going to see him in the morning tomorrow. We have a call scheduled, and I'm looking forward to that.
Well, and I will contact you and get his information. I will send him a card. And your website is carolmenaker.com. I'll put that in the show notes, as well as the Philadelphia Abolition. Say the name
The
again.
Abolitionist Law Center. Yeah, I'll send you the details on them.
Okay. And that'll all be in the show notes on our YouTube channel and on the Buzzsprout site where the podcast comes from. So plenty of opportunities to get more involved in this over half a century saga of injustice. Carol Menaker, is there anything I didn't ask you, anything you want to say before we say goodbye?
No, I'd just like to say that I'm grateful to everyone who's read the book, because I have heard from no one who didn't feel the same sense of injustice that I did. And it gives me hope that there are others who recognize the challenge. Given the myriad challenges we have right now, it's still there. It's at the bottom of a lot of lists because other things have taken precedence over it. But it shouldn't disappear. And prison reform, judicial reform really need to be attended to and moved up on the list. And so I'm grateful to everyone who's read and everyone who's corresponded with me. And I'm mostly grateful to Mohammed for being my friend and helping me have hope for things that maybe I wouldn't have otherwise had.
It's been such a pleasure seeing you and spending this hour talking with you about Frederick Muhammed Burton. And I'll take care. I hope to see you soon.
Yes, you too. Thanks, Carolyn.
I've been speaking with Carol Menaker, author of the memoir, The Worst Thing We've Ever Done, One Juror's Reckoning with Racial Injustice. You can find Carol online at carolmenaker.com please see my program notes about how to send correspondence to Muhammed Burton. This podcast is produced on the sacred ancestral land of the Anishinaabe people. Thanks to the California band Castle House for writing and performing our music. The Whimsy Farm podcast airs the 1st and 15th of each month on our YouTube channel, Carolyn Crane and Whimsy Farm, and wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Thanks to our underwriter, Just Play Productions, and to our paid Patreon members for their support of today's podcast. If you'd like to offer your support, please visit my website, whimsyfarm.net, and click the Patreon link to find a level of support that's right for you. There is also a free membership level. You can email me through the website, as well as access all links to past and current episodes. That's whimsyfarm.net. I'll be back on February 15th when Rowena Yasetta and Mariam Barry join me to contemplate love in its many forms. Until then, remember the words of Utah Phillips, who said, "Too many good people are doing too many good things to afford me the luxury of being pessimistic." Get out there and create some positive change. Stay safe, everyone.
whimsyfarms.net.